So what do? First of all, we have to get the economic story right. The real economic story is not something you can read off the income tables. It's a geographical story. It's a story of a small number of metropolitan areas, diverse, with growing populations, innovation hubs that are responsible for 2/3 of the economic growth in the United States over the past decade. There is an increasing disconnect between the growth in major metropolitan areas on the one hand and the smaller towns and rural hinterlands on the other. There used to be a strong economic relationship between big cities, small towns, and rural areas. That has broken down. And big cities can make it on their own in relationship with other big cities, not only in this country, but internationally. And the small towns and rural areas of the country feel abandoned, and with good reason. They have been. We haven't paid any attention to them. So economic policy, and I could go into detail, has to focus on an all-out effort to achieve the geographical reintegration of the US economy. Because if we don't do that in a system of geographical representation, such as the United States has, this split that we're seeing between places like New York on the one hand and the 2,600 out of 3,100 counties that voted for Donald Trump on the other, that split is not going to go away because the conditions that gave rise to the split will not go away. That's the first point. Here's the second point. Our failures of governance have contributed mightily to the populist uprising. One of the things that I do at Brookings is to help conduct survey research. And here are some results from a survey taken in April of 2016 that I paid a lot of attention to, but I should have paid even more. Here's the proposition, agree or disagree, quote, because things in the country have gone so far off track, the US needs a leader willing to break the rules to set things right. This was April of 2016. 45% of Americans agreed with that proposition. Perhaps it's not an entire accident that Mr. Trump got 46% of the vote in the fall. 49% of Republicans agreed with that proposition. 53% of white working class voters agreed with it, and 65% of self-announced Trump supporters did. So President Trump was not elected on a promise to follow the rules. From the standpoint of his supporters, he was elected on a promise to break the rules on their behalf. Why do they want the rules to be broken? Because they think the rules aren't working. And you know what? They're onto something, right? We have to understand that gridlocked, ineffective government is one of populism's best friends. If we want to deal with this, we have to figure out both politically and institutionally how to get beyond the party system at loggerheads than we now have. I have some ideas about how to do that. Another part of my life is devoted to trying to put that into practice. I'm not going to go through that now. But the idea that we can simply stare at each other across the partisan battlefield like entrenched armies in World War I, those of us who are relatively satisfied with the status quo can live with gridlock. The people who feel aggrieved by the status quo will not live with it, and they have revolted against it. And that revolt is against not only the policies, but also the rules of the game. That's just a fact. Third, I'm going to make myself probably unpopular in this company, but I'm going to say it anyway. We can't deal comprehensively with the causes of populism unless we purge the poison of the immigration issue from our system, because it is poisoning our system. And in order to do that, we are going to have to reach a grand compromise. And we are going to have to consider the possibility that those of you who are strongly pro-immigration in this room are not entirely right, and the people who disagree with you are not entirely wrong. I recently visited Canada. They love their immigration system, Canada. I can prove that. Despite the fact that the flow of immigrants to Canada as a share of the native-born population is 3 times as high as it is in the United States. 3 times. We're now accepting about 1 million a year. The Canadian equivalent is 3 million a year. And there's no problem. Why? Because they structure their immigration system differently, right? Their centerpiece is potential economic contribution and not family unification. Nobody else in the world does immigration policy the way the United States does. Nobody else in the world gives 2/3 of its green card slots each year to immigrants based on family connections. That's a fact. Canada doesn't do it. Britain doesn't do it. Australia doesn't do it. That's just the English-speaking countries. No other country does this. I understand why we did it in the past. The question is whether we can afford to keep on doing business this way. And by the way, no other country in the world is as casual about acquiring linguistic competence in the dominant language as we are. At the other end of the continuum, I guess, is Israel, where as soon as you get there, get your citizenship, you're sent to language boot camp for 6 months. But guess what? You know, a single language is the single greatest integrating force in a civil society and in a polity. If you don't have a single language, you have a formula for division and resentment. I could go on, but in short, we have to deal with the real economic problem, the real political problem, and the real cultural problem. If we want to do more than wring our hands and feel morally superior to the barbarians at the gates.